Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Slash Pick. This is the show where we talk about slasher movies. I'm your host, DJ Wooldridge. With me, as always, is Adam Hlavik. Adam, how you doing?
I'm great.
Oh, yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man, because today we're getting into an iconic slasher movie from an iconic slasher movie franchise, but I've never seen this entry in the franchise. This is the original Friday the 13th that we're talking about today.
There she is in all her glory.
Yeah,
oh yeah, baby.
Oh yeah. Well, we started the day with you texting me like, "Hey, theatrical cut or theatrical
We'll just leave that there.
theatrical cut or extended edition?" I'm like, I didn't even know there was an uncut version, so I'm guessing theatrical is what I saw.
No, it was because I actually did look on Paramount Plus to see what, because I have the Scream Factory box set that they released a couple years back.
Yeah.
And, I forget that sometimes they have multiple versions of certain movies.
Yeah.
Which in horror, I feel like that's so common.
So common.
To have like whatever the MPAA agreed on would be theatrically appropriate.
Yeah.
And then the unrated, completely spill your guts out version on Blu-ray or DVD or whatever.
Yeah.
So I cross-referenced and I was like, okay, cool. He watched theatrical. I'll just watch the theatrical one.
Yeah.
I don't think the uncut version's that much longer. I think it's only a couple minutes at best.
Well,
And it's just gorier, basically.
okay, yeah, because I was going to say, I think it just surprised me because I know some of the later Jason movies have pretty famous uncut versions. I want to say Jason Goes to Hell has it's one of those like, don't bother with the theatrical version, watch the uncut version, that
Right.
kind of a thing. With the original one, with like the first Friday the 13th, it's like, were people paying enough attention? Like, what couldn't you get away with?
Yeah.
In that first one, it'd be like if they came out, which for all I know it exists, like, oh, you want to see the uncut original Evil Dead? I'm like, what? Stop! Who stopped them? Who was paying attention to the original Evil Dead? That somebody stopped him.
Yeah, and I wonder if it has something to do with because some of these horror movies, they're independently made, and then a studio will pick them up, or some independent studio or independent financier will pick them up and put them out for distribution. With Friday the 13th, I know it's now owned by, I think it's now owned by Paramount again.
No.
There's been such a crazy rights issue with this franchise.
Yep.
It was at Paramount, then Warner Brothers, then Paramount again. But I think Paramount has it again.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if this was like something like, well, Paramount's going to pick it up, but they're going to pick it up, but
Yeah.
we got some notes for you.
Notes,
to make
yeah,
it more,
you're right.
Appropriate.
And
Whereas
what's-
like Terrifier 3, for example, is a perfect example of a movie that was like, you know what? We're going to just skip all that. And we're just going to
Yep.
do it ourselves. And it's basically unrated.
And they're
it is.
doing all right for themselves. Those Terrifier.
Gory.
Yeah. Have you seen
Yeah.
Terrifier 3?
I have.
Okay, because it came out right when the baby came, and so I'm like, I'll wait. But I remember, within the past year, we might have talked about this. Within the past year, I watched the first two Terrifiers, and I thought Terrifier 1 was good for what it was. It's one of those like, ooh, this is definitely a low budget indie, low budget movie, low budget slasher movie. But then you see Terrifier 2, I'm like, oh, this is great. Like Terrifier 2 is legit, real good. Little long, but like legit, real good. So I'm excited for Terrifier 3.
Yeah, it's obviously more in line with Terrifier 2.
Yeah.
But they had just a little bit more money, so they were able to do just a little bit more stuff. But you're totally right, though. Like, Terrifier is an interesting movie because I feel like, kind of like Halloween, it takes place mostly in like one location or a couple of small locations. And then it branches out. And then by the third one, we're in a school, we're in a shopping mall.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, they got more money. They got more money.
Honestly, I think Terrifier. I was talking to a friend of mine about this. Like Terrifier is the one because there's times with people. You're out here, you're trying to make it, and you see some people make it, and you're like, why? That movie wasn't even that good. Terrifier, I think, is one of those examples of like, no, this is how the system should work. You did something that struck a chord with people. Like I would say personally, I would say like the first Terrifier, like Art the Clown. You nailed it with Art the Clown. Like good job with Art. And that was enough. And then they got 2, and it was they got more money, but it was such a drastic improvement. It's like, and then for 3, they have even more. Like, yeah, this is how this system should work. This is a case study of how things should work because you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and it's crazy to me that you look at just some of the other films that have been coming out in recent months. $250 million to make some of these movies.
Yeah, for real.
And I'm like, dude, you are being outdone box office wise by a movie made for literally just a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
The
Well,
definition of a shoestring budget in comparison.
I want to say
So it's
even
really sad.
even more ambitious, because I want to say we're talking about like Terrifier 3 had so much more money. I think it's like 3 million, like which compared to the
Yeah.
other Terrifiers is a lot, but like
It's a lot more, but
nothing. But even to that, when you talk about something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of the best looking movies in the last decade, and I think it was like 80 million, which again, you're like, that's maybe 50, 80 million, somewhere in that ballpark, which again, to like normal, you look at your bank account and you're like, I'd love to see 80 million in there.
Yeah.
But again, when you're comparing to like the Deadpools and the Wolverines, which are 250
Right.
million, the new season, I just started watching the new season of Arcane, which I do not remember the first season at all, turns out. That show was like 250 million. And it's like, what are
Yeah.
you doing, man? What are we doing? What's I mean, are the artists, is that money going to the animators? I don't think it is. I don't think so. Anyway,
no.
we've gone far afield. If you guys want us to do a podcast about how movies are financed in Hollywood, we can do that for you. But that's not what this is. This is Slash Pick. We're going through slasher movies chronologically. So if you're just catching up, we have done so far Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and then this Christmas we got an episode coming out for Black Christmas, which is important we recorded it earlier, but it's getting put out later. That is important to note because I will bring it up here because Black Christmas continues to influence the movies we're watching, which is wild to me. Like this movie I'd heard about, but I'd never even seen. It's like Black Christmas actually is kind of a weird touchstone on these movies.
Right?
But yeah, so now we're in the 1980s. We're watching Friday the 13th. The synopsis is a group of teenage camp counselors attempt to reopen an abandoned summer camp with a tragic past, but they are stalked by a mysterious, relentless killer. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 66% with an audience score of 60%. It was directed by Sean S. Cunningham and written by Victor Miller and Ron Kurz. But before we get into the movie itself, since we're going through chronologically, one of the things I like about this show is I like going through the year we're in, because especially some of those earlier horror movies like Texas Chainsaw and Halloween are very influenced by the events happening around them. So in 1980, here's what we got going on. On January 1st, the comic strip The Far Side debuts in newspapers. On January 16th, Paul McCartney is arrested in Tokyo, Japan for bringing 7.7 ounces of marijuana into the country. In January 20th, Super Bowl 24 happens. The Pittsburgh Steelers become the first NFL franchise to win 4 Super Bowls, defeating the Rams. The game was shown to the Americans held hostage in Iran. That's why I brought this up. So there's several news stories going on in 1981 that are dealing with the Iran hostage crisis, which 53 United States diplomats and citizens were held hostage in Iran from November 4th, 1979 to their release in January 20th, 1981. Oof. And per that, January 27th, the Canadian caper, 6 United States diplomats posing as Canadians managed to escape from Tehran as they board a flight to Zurich, Switzerland. In February 2nd through 3rd, the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot takes place. 33 inmates are killed and more than 100 inmates are injured. February 22nd, the United States, people who've watched sports movies will be familiar with this one. The United States Olympic hockey team defeats the Soviet Union in the medal round of the Winter Olympics. It's called the Miracle on Ice.
Do you believe in miracles?
Yep. In March 1st, Voyager 1 probe confirms the existence of Janus, a moon of Saturn. That is how we're just still learning stuff about our galaxy. It's so funny. Like it feels like so locked in place, but no, we're still learning stuff about our solar system itself.
I know that's insane, and you take that kind of stuff for granted now because you can hold an app up and it'll give you an entire diagram of the solar system, and you're like, whatever, cool.
The one that blows my mind, again, this is not the podcast for this, but the one that blows my mind is there's still a search for, Pluto got downgraded to a planetoid because there's a bunch of Pluto-sized things floating around that side of the solar system, but there's still, because of the math of it. Some people still suspect that there is a planet 9, that there is some other gravitational force out there affecting our solar system. And what blows my mind about this, Adam, is that based off the math and the gravitational mass this thing would need to have, it is either a planet about 6 times the size of Earth or a black hole the size of a grapefruit. That is how
Holy
much
shit.
gravitational pull black holes have.
Yeah.
That this something the size of a grapefruit has the same gravitational effect as a planet 6 times the size of Earth. That blows my mind.
Yep, that sounds about right. I mean,
that's insane.
I love
to me.
Interstellar, and it's all about that.
Dude. Yeah. Okay. So, pertinent to this podcast, March 12th, the Chicago serial killer John Wayne Gacy is found guilty of 33 counts of murder and 1 count each of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child. Ooh, fun. Hey, why won't YouTube let me market this video, I wonder? He is sentenced to death by the jury. His execution is set for June 2nd, 1980. April 14th, the 52nd Academy Awards ceremony, hosted by Johnny Carson, is held at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. Robert Benton's Kramer vs. Kramer wins 5 awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. The film is tied with Bob Fosse's All That Jazz in receiving 9 nominations. 8-year-old Justin Henry, nominated for Best Supporting Actor, notably becomes the youngest Oscar nominee in any category. I like bringing up the Oscars because it helps. I think it's a good litmus test of like, how many people are still talking about, look, Kramer versus Kramer is a famous movie, but it's one of those like, but Friday the 13th, it wouldn't even be mentioned in the awards. And that's what we're talking about today. So
Yeah, I know. And that's totally true, because even I look back and I'm like, well, randomly, what won this and this and this in 1977 or 72 or 65? And I'm like, what the hell are all these other movies?
Yeah. Like you go back to 78 when we were talking about Halloween. That same month, I did a show with Sal talking about Superman. Halloween wouldn't have even been in those conversations, but Halloween and Superman the movie are probably 2 of the most influential. I don't even know if it's arguable. Those are 2 of the most influential movies almost ever. Like Superman still impacts superhero movies to this day.
78 for sure of all time, very likely.
Yeah, and Halloween still impacts the movie we're about ready to talk about. So it's impacted almost every horror movie since.
Yeah.
The April 24th Pennsylvania lottery scandal. The Pennsylvania lottery is rigged by 6 men, including the host of the live TV drawing, Nick Perry. May 3rd, Carrie Leitner, a 13-year-old girl, is killed by a drunk driver in Fair Oaks, California. Her mother, Candy, forms the organization Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So that came about in the 1980s, in 1980 specifically. Paul Geidel is convicted of second-degree murder in 1911. Was convicted of second-degree murder in 1911. Is released from prison in 1980 after 68 years and 245 days being incarcerated. The longest ever time served by an inmate. May 16th, rookie Magic Johnson scores 42 points to lead the Los Angeles Lakers to a 123-107 victory over the 76ers to clinch the National Basketball Association championship for the Lakers, who prevailed despite the absence of future Hall of Famer Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. May 17th, a Miami, Florida court acquits 4 white police officers of the killing of Arthur McDuffie. This results in they kill Arthur McDuffie, who's a black insurance executive. This provokes a 3-day race riot. So, things haven't changed that much since 1980. In May 18th, Mount St. Helens erupts in Washington, killing 57 and causing $3 billion in damage. May 21st, The Empire Strikes Back is released. May 22nd, Pac-Man.
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that.
Yep. May 22nd, Pac-Man, the best-selling arcade game of all time, is released. May 23rd, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is released. And that was one of those, when I read that, I'm like, could we have done The Shining on this show? It kind of stretches the premise, but but
wow,
it's real good.
I didn't. May was a weird month for movies. You had Friday the 13th on May 9th.
Yeah.
Then you had The Empire Strikes Back, and then you had The Shining.
We still could do the. Does The Shining count? It doesn't count, does it? As a slasher, it doesn't count, does it?
Not as a slasher, but as a good movie.
Real good movie. Real good. June 1st, the cable news network CNN is officially launched. June 9th, in Los Angeles, comedian Richard Pryor is badly burned trying to freebase cocaine. Sorry, it's a sad thing that happened, but it's the circumstances are kind of funny to me. Addiction's not funny. Sorry, everybody. July 16th, Former California Governor and actor Ronald Reagan is nominated for president at the RNC in Detroit, Michigan. Influenced by the religious right, the convention also drops its longstanding support for the Equal Rights Amendment, dismaying moderate Republicans. So, beginning of the end there in a lot of ways. October 2nd, Congressman Michael Myers is expelled from the House of Representatives by a vote of 376 over 30, the first congressional expulsion since the Civil War. One assumes it's because of all the murders. All the Haddonfield murders, one assumes. Or maybe it was because he was busy doing spy work. It's unclear. And December 8th, John Lennon is shot and killed by Mark David Chapman in front of the Dakota apartment building in New York City. December 14th, 4 people are murdered and 4 others are injured by 2 armed robbers at Bob's Big Boy in Los Angeles Boulevard in Los Angeles. I have eaten there. Didn't know people were murdered there. That's good to know. And in December 26th, Richard Case, the vampire of Sacramento, kills himself by overdose in San Quentin State Prison. What's interesting to me about this, Adam, is that as we've been going through this feels weirdly, this feels the lightest in serial killer news of years.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me feel, I'll be interested to see as we chart this, if, all the serial killer stuff in the 70s really laid the groundwork for this genre. And then we kind of get more and more distance from it as we get out through the 80s and into the 90s.
Yeah. But I think the most burning question that we have not asked yet is, why was Friday the 13th released on Friday, May 9th?
Yeah.
Instead of Friday, June 13th.
Yeah.
A month later. What is that about?
I don't know that they mentioned that. When I was looking into my research, I don't know if that was brought up.
Why would you not?
Yeah.
Literally a month later. There's a Friday the 13th. And you don't put it out on Friday the 13th? What is wrong?
Adam, if you could do me a favor and look that up real quick while I go through some behind the mask. Here's some behind the scenes stuff for Friday the 13th. So the original screenplay was tentatively titled A Long Night at Camp Blood. That's not a good title. You could have done Camp Blood. Camp Blood might have worked.
I think so, yeah.
It is interesting to me that
nowadays, Camp Blood. That would be a TV show called Camp Blood.
Yeah, that'd be where it's at. It is interesting that this shares with Halloween, where the fact that it takes the day at which it takes place almost feels tangential to the events going on. So maybe I don't know that that's an interesting connection there. You're going to be shocked to learn that this movie was prompted by the success of John Carpenter's Halloween. Isn't that nuts? Could you what?
No,
what?
Stop it. Stop.
Yeah, so director Cunningham put out an advertisement to sell the film in Variety in early 1979, while Miller, the writer, was still drafting the screenplay. After casting the film in New York City, filming took place in New Jersey in the summer of 1979. On an estimated budget of $550,000, which I'm going to be honest with you, was higher than I expected. A bidding war ensued over the finished film, ending with Paramount Pictures acquiring the film for domestic distribution, while Warner Brothers secured international distribution rights. One assumes that is the beginning of the rights issues that Adam was referencing earlier.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. The writer Miller delighted in inventing a serial killer who turned out to be somebody's spoilers. But we're going to spoil this movie. The spoilers for this movie start now.
FYI, spoilers
are coming. Yeah. Somebody's mother, a murderer whose only motivation was the love of her child. Quote, I took motherhood and turned it on its head, and I think it was great fun. Mrs. Voorhees was the mother I'd always wanted. A mother who would have killed for her kids. Sounds like you need to go to therapy, my boy. Miller was unhappy about the filmmaker's decision to make Jason Voorhees the killer in sequels. Quote, Jason was dead from the very beginning. He was a victim, not a villain. The idea of Jason appearing at the end of the film was initially not used in the original script. In Miller's final draft, the film ended with Alice merely floating on the lake. Jason's appearance was actually suggested by makeup designer Tom Savini. If you're not familiar with Tom Savini, dude's a legend, and he will come up again on this show. Savini stated that the whole reason the cliffhanger at the end was I had just seen Carrie, so we thought we needed a chair jumper like that. And I said, let's bring in Jason. Betsy Palmer, who plays Mrs. Voorhees, explains how she developed the character of Mrs. Voorhees. Being an actress who used the Stanislavski method, I always tried to find details about my character. With Pamela, I began with a class ring that I remember reading in the script that she'd worn. Starting with that, I traced Pamela back to my own high school days in the early 1940s. So it's 44, a very conservative time, and Pamela has a steady boyfriend. They have sex, which is very bad, of course. And Pamela soon gets pregnant with Jason. The father takes off, and when Pamela tells her parents, they disown her because having babies out of wedlock isn't something that good girls do. I think she took Jason and raised him the best she could, but he turned out to be a very strange boy. She took lots of odd jobs, and one of those jobs was as a cook at a summer camp. Then Jason drowns drowns, and her whole world collapses. What were the counselors doing instead of watching Jason? They were having sex, which is the way that she got into trouble. From that point on, Pamela became very psychotic and puritanical in her attitudes as she was determined to kill all of the immoral camp counselors. That is now my head canon. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good one. And then if you watch this movie, and we're going to get into it, if you had the same question I had, which is, wait, did they actually kill a snake on camera? They did actually kill a snake on camera. I don't know if they just didn't care about those laws, or I didn't look up to see when those laws were instituted. But they just kill a snake on camera. And I'm going to be honest with you, Adam, it kind of bumped me out. I was like, oh, that didn't do nothing to nobody.
Someone who hates snakes, I was like,
Okay. Adam, in that time, did you find out why they didn't release it on Friday the 13th?
I didn't find out why they didn't release it on Friday the 13th, but they were very conscious and aware of the fact that it was going to be releasing around that date. So it sounds like they were trying to mostly target that as like a marketing thing of like, it's coming out right around Friday the 13th, but it still doesn't answer the question of why they didn't just do it on Friday the 13th, especially because, the film, like we'll get into it, it's set in the modern day, basically.
Yeah.
So it's like, why not just take advantage of the fact that it is, there's a flashback and then we jump present day. It's Friday the 13th. We're in the movie.
I
don't know. But, I feel like as we know with, especially nowadays with release dates, and I don't think people were planting flags in 1980 like they are now.
Well, because as we just saw, it was just the release of Empire. So we're at the very beginning of the blockbuster era.
Yeah, exactly. So I would imagine that there were already enough films and not enough theaters available maybe on June 13th. So I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, man, that would have been kind of cool to have Friday the 13th debut on Friday the 13th.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what came out on June 13th in 1980. Maybe there was a big... none of those mean anything to me. Maybe they were scared of whatever was coming out. Weird. All right. Maybe they were scared about Bronco Billy, or The Island, or Holy Moses. Yeah.
Moses.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. So speaking of getting in the movie, let's get into the movie. So we start off with another killer's POV shot. So clearly this is pulled from Halloween, but Halloween, this is what we were talking about earlier. Halloween was influenced by Black Christmas. So again, it's just this wild, like, man, I did not expect Black Christmas to be as influential as it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's that, and trying to remember off the top of my head if there is like a very, very distinct POV shot in Psycho. I don't really feel like there is one.
I don't feel like there is.
At least not like in the tracking sense.
Yeah.
Like you might see the perspective of a character from another character's eyes, but we're not exactly like walking through a location with them. But I do feel like Black Christmas kind of maybe set it off, but then Halloween really like put its mark on that.
Yeah.
Make that really impactful because it was all a oneer, or is meant to look like a oneer. Mm-hmm. So I feel like now you have this basically like people just copycatting this whole concept.
100%. And I think what's interesting about this too is it feels like you were watching in real time a genre try and figure out its rules. So it's like, do slasher movies open with POV shots of the killer? And I think later we'll figure out like, nah, that's not really, you don't need that. But at this point, it's like, well, Halloween did it. And I think John Carpenter, being a kind of a student of movies the way he was, is like, well, I thought it was cool I was like, I like Black Christmas. I thought that was cool. But this is very clearly, we're aping Halloween. That we're very clearly trying to rip that off. And we start off with camp counselors singing various campfire songs around a fire, including Glory, Glory, Hallelujah. And it's like, well, listen, you sinners. You sinners.
Sinners be sinning.
Come on. Do row your boat ashore or something. Two counselors separate themselves from the group to have tetanus-filled sex in a cabin loft. They get the grungiest sheet, and they're like, let's do it on this. And I'm like, I mean, you're teenagers, so I guess I get it. But like, oh my God.
Good luck with that rusty nail.
Ugh. Well, fortunately, listen. Serial killer's there to do them a favor because tetanus is awful if you looked up what happens if you get tetanus. So, they don't have to worry about that because they get stabbed to death.
Yeah. They're going to be done in a murder.
Yeah, they're going to be murdered. And I do, and put a pin in this because it is something I want to revisit later. When we find out who the killer is, I know we just said, but I'm going to act like we didn't just say. I do have questions about this person's capabilities.
Yeah, right?
Because they accomplish some pretty crazy stuff. Yeah, they accomplish some pretty crazy stuff. Yeah. And this is what I wanted to ask you. You think because obviously this is very clearly they go off, they have sex, and they're punished for it. I do think there's an interesting little puritanical thread in slasher movies, and I'm kind of wondering if this is where that starts.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Well, because I'm thinking back at just the movies that we've watched. And you think about that famous shower scene in Psycho. And the idea that it is someone who's not even being provocative in any way, shape, or form. It's just someone taking a shower.
Yeah.
But the idea of like the naked woman and, having Norman looking through the peephole and staring at her and, like feeling some sort of sexual tension or whatever. I feel like that was some kind of a little like sprinkling of an idea that I think Hitchcock was aware of, but I don't know if necessarily people clocked it exactly like what that could turn into.
Yeah.
And then Halloween obviously plays with it and stuff too. So yeah, I don't know if I could pinpoint exactly which movie it was, but because Black Christmas also kind of plays with those ideas a little bit, like sexualization and slumber party. Like there's so many of those movies that do that. But to think of like which one film definitely like pinpoints that and runs with it, you could say Halloween, but I feel like Friday the 13th has more of it. Because Halloween really just has Linda and Bob. Those are the only characters that are killed right after they have sex.
Yeah.
Because, well, I guess Judith too, but it's just Judith and not Judith and her boyfriend.
Yeah.
But I feel like Friday the 13th, there's like multiple moments where like people are in sexual, moments and things where things like that happen. So I don't know. It's very possible.
Well, with Friday the 13th, it becomes the main motivating factor, right? Like we just saw with that actress, which she was talking about. It's like that's kind of part of the motivating factor is the counselors were not aware because of they were
especially for the backstory.
And I do think when we watch Halloween, I argued that like there is subtext of it being a sex thing for Michael, and this takes that subtext and makes it text basically. But you are right that I think you go back to Psycho, and I think what these movies are communicating with is that like it's the same reason why even to this day, for the most part, if you have a crime movie, you need to punish your crime. We can revel. Scarface can be super cool and have fast cars and fast women, but he needs to be punished by the end of the movie because this is wrong and we are in America. And only presidents get away with the crimes in America. So it feels like you're dealing with this push and pull of sex sells. You want to titillate your audience, but you also have to remind them that sex is bad actually. Or whatever, however you want to phrase that kind of cultural norm, because it does feel like, ooh,
if you're naughty, you might get murdered.
Yeah, we're seeing sexy stuff. That's bad, but it's okay because they're killed. It was like it reminds me a little bit of I grew up in a religious community, and so you talk to people and. When you're young, you're like 13 or whatever, and you're like, can we watch that movie? It's rated R. It's like, oh, it's just rated R for violence. Like somehow seeing a guy's head explode is somehow more morally acceptable than a nipple. And it's like, what are we doing? What's going on?
Yep.
Oh my God.
I mean, like not to get like too into the weeds of it, but even like when I was growing up, I'd watch things like RoboCop and Terminator and all that sort of stuff. and I watched True Lies, and there's the scene of Jamie Lee Curtis like dancing in the middle of the hotel room. I didn't get in trouble, or I didn't get a talking to about watching those movies.
Yes.
I got a talking to about that one scene.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay, what are the rules here? What's the boundary line?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you're okay with me watching Alex Murphy get shot up to a complete
yeah.
crisp, but Jamie Lee Curtis, that's a no-no. Okay.
It is one of those. Yeah, again, we don't want to get too far off the rails, but it is one of those as you get older. Like you know, when you're younger, you kind of assume like all of culture started off more conservative, and as theoretically, air quotes, gotten more accepting of stuff, and then you're like, no, this is in a lot of ways an American problem, that we were founded by Puritans, and that's something we're still having. Slave owners and Puritans, and those two things are stuff we are really struggling to get over as a nation. But so it's just interesting. I wanted to note it as we continue on with the show, because I think it's, especially when you talk about the Friday the 13th movies, it'll be more apparent. So in my notes, I have a girl who I assume is the final girl has a weird exposition exchange with a dog at a gas station. And I do think this is one of the best maneuvers of the movie, because the first person we meet outside of these camp counselors, which are kind of our little cold open,
Right.
this first person we meet, Annie, who they kind of, you know, low key set up as like, here's your introduction to this world. You assume she's our final girl. You assume she's our main character. Nope, she sure isn't. She sure is not.
Also, by the way, go back to that picture really quick.
Yeah, that's a man's hands.
Those are some. I mean, you know, do what you want, Mrs. Voorhees, but damn, girl.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I kind of wondered, because I'm going to be honest with you, man. I think the only Friday the 13th movie, like stuff like this, like the reveal of who this is, I knew through cultural osmosis. You know, you pay attention to stuff, you know. But I think the first, and possibly before this, only Friday the 13th movie I've seen beginning to end is the reboot, is the remake they made in like, what, 2009?
Oh, really?
Yeah, because that was, you know, like I said, I grew up in a religious community, so I wasn't like
Right.
getting a lot of horror movies. And I think that came out when I was in college, so I was able to go see it in theaters. And the good news with that is that one kind of like summarizes the first three movies. Like, hey, here's the gist.
It does.
I not having seen two, part of me kind of, and also Mrs. Voorhees does some stuff that is insane. Like if you try to picture what she's up to off camera, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to think that maybe Jason is, even though he's not in this movie, he is in this movie, and he's doing some of this stuff. I kind of like to imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's totally fair, especially like where the series goes. You know, because my first entry into this franchise was Jason Takes Manhattan.
Oh my god! That's awesome.
And I think that came out like in 89-ish.
Yeah.
So, you know, throughout the 90s, it was always on TV. And that was the one I saw the most. So I actually didn't even know about the twist in this movie until maybe like high school or something.
Yeah.
Because I had not seen all the films. And then once I found that out, first of all, I was like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean the mom's? What do you mean mom? What?
Yeah.
No Jason till part 2. What?
Yep.
So then I went back and I watched them all, or watched everything up to that point. But yeah, I think it's very fair to assume that like maybe he's just like being her little henchman, and he's just running around setting things up for her.
It does kind of dismantle her motivation a little bit, but you know, whatever, man. I don't know. In the chat,
I mean, when you see what he looks like, it kind of justifies it.
Yeah. We have Grayson Bullock says, happy to be here. Love this show. And I just want to remind everybody at home, if you want to watch this live or check it out early, ad free, you can do that over at patreon.com/onlystupidanswers. Thanks for joining us, Grayson. Annie is how we get a lot of our, and it's so funny too, like going back and like you think about something like Cabin in the Woods that is very kind of generally lampooning the slasher franchise, but then you see specifically kind of quoting this movie because we have I think it's The Harbinger. We have, do I have his name here? Is it Ralph or something? What's the guy? Yeah, Ralph.
Ralph, I think, yeah.
She goes into a diner. She's like, can somebody take me to Camp Crystal Lake? And everybody's like, oh, Camp Crystal. Oh. But specifically Ralph, who's all neck veins, by the way, is like, you're going to get killed.
You're going to die up there.
Yeah. And then my favorite, we're not there yet, but my favorite is when he shows up in the camp and he's on his little bike.
Oh, my God.
And we follow him the entire time he's on the road.
And he's like about to fall every time he pedals.
Oh my God. So anyway, she gets a ride up there. And what's eventually going to happen with her is, she hitchhikes with one guy who will only take her so far, right? Is that how that happens? And
Yeah, it
then,
only takes her like right past the cemetery, basically, and then from there on, she has to go down like a completely different road. Which I'm like, if you're offering to give her a ride to Camp Crystal Lake,
just give her a ride, man.
why not just drive her all the way? Like, is it so out of your way for you to drop her off and then turn around and go back to the main road? But
yeah. So then she
plot.
hitchhikes with somebody else, and was hint to her, if she'd been paying attention, we go to a POV shot. So if she'd been paying attention,
Yep.
she would have known we were in trouble. And this person drives right past Crystal Lake and chases her down. And as you see in the image we have here, she gets stabbed real good. And I'm going to be honest with you. I was like, good move. Yeah, good move, Friday the 13th, because I thought this was our main girl.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the one thing that that I think especially in this movie you kind of learn there isn't really a main character. Like the main character is the POV of the killer.
Yeah, well, and also they do something that will later or has already been. Do you know when Alien came out?
Alien came out in 1979. So the year
Okay,
before.
so they're kind of in some ways kind of ripping off Alien because if you're going back and watching Alien, you're like, well, Ripley's the main character, but it takes a minute for the movie to settle on Ripley. You know what I mean? Like
it does.
and which I think is another really good maneuver. Anyway, so we meet our victims. I'm the other counselors, and they're in trouble because like literally the first thing out of their mouths is they're talking about sex and stuff. I think I had trouble with the characters' names. You got Ned, Kevin Bacon, and Marcy. That's right, gang. A surprise, Kevin Bacon. If you didn't know he was in this movie, there he is. Baby Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. It's so fun to like go through and we'll eventually get to it, but like to see these early now movie stars, Kevin Bacon, Johnny Depp, Jamie Lee Curtis, like it's pretty cool to see them in these early horror flicks.
Absolutely. I never learned Kevin Bacon's name. He's just Kevin Bacon. My notes from the here on out. So they're driving up and it's like, they're all being little pervs. And then we meet the guy who runs the place. I think Steve is his name. And he's being a weirdo too because he's like flirting with... I didn't understand the relationship at first. I thought like maybe this was his like girlfriend or whatever that's helping with the camp. No, this is another counselor. So one presumes underage
thirsty
girl.
boy.
Yeah. And he's like... He's fixing up and he's like, hey, beautiful, just give it. And this is another thing that confused me, Adam. Maybe you can clear it up. I want to say the conversation that happened is, hey, she's like, I don't know if I like doing this. And he's like, well, give it till Friday, implying that this is not Friday. And then I was like, then once the movie starts happening, I'm like, wait, did multiple days pass? And now we're at Friday the 13th? What's going on here?
Right. Yeah. And I think that, that's, truthfully, I've never even like paid enough attention to that particular thing, but that would make sense. Like, why would you, because it all feels like from the film's perspective that it takes place on from like one day to and one night.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't it just be Friday?
Yeah. Give it to the end of Friday, give it to the end of the day.
Yeah.
Give it to hey, listen, just give it to the end of Friday the 13th. This is going more with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre mold where all these characters to varying degrees kind of suck. And you're like, yeah, good that Jason gets them. Not Jason, but whatever. Specifically, I want to draw specific attention to Ned, who we meet in that van ride, but he also almost pins a girl with an arrow. And his response to that is going into a Bogart impression. A lot of people like to do impressions in this movie, which I feel like is not the best choice. But it's one of those. Ned sucks. I was glad when Ned wandered off on his own into the woods. I'm like, good, let's get Ned out of here.
I know, it's always so funny when you have those particular characters who make those choices, and you're like, bro, you're just asking to be killed off. Literally. You're just wishing for me, you dead.
Yeah. We're at the point where Annie dies, and I have my notes. So I was wrong. I was very wrong about Annie, about her being the protagonist. Oh yeah, then Ned fakes drowning so he can sexually
Right.
assault one of the girls. Really don't like
Kevin
that.
Bacon belly flops it into the lake. It's
Yep,
great.
that's great. It's awesome. And then we get to the snake scene, and the kids, these counselors, demolish a room over a snake.
What are you saying? Are you saying that it's like, too much?
I'm saying it's too much, man.
Are you a snake? Are you a snake lover? I'll kill you. If you ask me to watch your house again and you have a snake, no.
No.
Immediately no.
Listen,
Absolutely
man.
not.
I'm a big live and let liver, man. Like, you know, grab that snake by the tail, get it outside. I don't think it's poisonous. Now, I grew up in the desert, right? So I grew up before. I had a good stint in Florida, but I also lived in Tucson for a while. If it rattles at me, whatever we need to do to get that snake. If we have to kill the snake to get it out there, I'm not fucking around with that shit.
Yeah. If it rattles, no.
If it
thank
rattles,
you.
no, we're not messing around with that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, get a pillowcase. Like, he gets in there. And what's interesting to me is this is the introduction of the machete. I think what's this kid's name that runs in? We're introduced to, it's Bill. And Bill runs in with a machete, and I'm like, this is how we get the icon. Because he's just like whacking at grass. Like he's doing jack shit with that machete. Like, I don't know like, get a lawnmower, dude. What are you doing? It's not like whatever. And he runs in with a machete. And I'm like, the iconic Friday the 13th machete. The reason that's the weapon here is because of this scene with the snake. That's crazy to me.
Right.
Yeah, so they chop off a snake's head, which bummed me out. I don't know, man. You got Tom Savini. He could rick up a snake. This made me think of Apocalypse Now, where you get where they butcher. I think it's like an ox, and you're like, "Oh, this is upsetting."
Yeah. But I'm still not that upset about a snake though. Sorry.
Wait, I gotta go. Do you know the origin of your snake hatred? Is it like Indiana Jones? Did you fall into a train car of snakes?
No, I truthfully, like, I don't know. I just think,
is it a texture thing?
I think part of it was when the neighborhood I lived in as a kid, I lived right on the edge of a canyon, and we used to get snakes fairly frequently.
Yeah.
And we, at one point, had built a sandbox for my brother.
Ooh.
And when he was in the sandbox playing, he was on top of a rattlesnake and didn't know it. Thankfully, nothing happened.
Yeah.
But I think just the idea that, like, I could wake up and, have a snake in my room just because I left the door cracked open a little too much.
Yeah.
No.
It makes me
they're
think
just
of
nasty.
like whenever you see like TikToks or whatever from people in Australia, and they're like normal day in Australia, and you go in their bathroom and there's a biggest snake
Look
you've
at
ever
this
seen.
big motherfucker.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, that's not normal.
And not only is it big, but because it's Australia, it's probably one of the most poisonous snakes on the planet. You know what I mean? You're like,
the thing has to
"Jeez."
look at you and you're dead.
Yeah, jeez. They kill the snake. A cop comes looking around for Ralph. He was the harbinger from
God,
earlier.
this
cop, man. And you know what's
What a
funny?
schmuck.
Yeah, he's such a schmuck. And you know what's funny is I'm all for giving cops a little bit of shit. But these kids suck so much. I'm like, man, just all bastards here. All y'all are bastards.
Yeah.
I
You
think.
smoking that stuff? You
Yeah.
getting high? I'm like, oh my God, please punch him.
Do you think the reason this scene exists? Because I still think we're in a stage. They had to do this with Black Christmas too. They didn't do this with Halloween. I think because the timeline of Halloween is so quick.
Yeah.
Do you think there's still this need of like, hey, the cops aren't going to help you? By the way, we need to establish the cops aren't coming to save you.
Yeah, and I that's a really like good point to bring up because I honestly don't know again like what film or series of films or if it was just like a happy coincidence and that's just kind of like the thought process of someone who writes horror is let's make the police really incompetent so it justifies the reasons why they're not like more primarily focused and featured in our scripts. They don't believe the teenagers, they don't believe what's happening, they're in denial. But guess what? They end up getting killed because they're in denial.
Yeah.
And I do feel like Halloween is one of those few, because, like it even happens in A Nightmare on Elm Street. John Saxon is very much in denial of what's happening to his daughter and the kids.
Yeah.
And
in
I feel
his
like
defense, it's a dream monster, so it's a little more excusable that he has trouble accepting it.
Yeah. But, and like Halloween is one of the few that is like very much like in the knee-deep slasher genre where Brackett has to be somewhat convinced by Loomis, but not too convinced. Like once things start happening, the cops are on Loomis's side. Later on in the movies, it
No.
changes a little
Oh,
bit,
dude, we
but
get almost like an Abbott and Costello routine. I think it's like, what is it, 4 or 5?
Halloween 5.
Yeah, jeez. Well, and it's funny too because there's a couple things there, and when you start talking about it, it's like maybe cops were the cell phones of their day. Like, we need to have a scene that explains why this doesn't get them out of the jam, like why this doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I feel like and that'll be a fun evolution to kind of see as we get through these movies is how technology advances and how that also affects these stories. But yeah, like the incompetent cop or the cop who's just literally just there just to be a pain in the ass for one scene.
Yeah.
It's fine, but get rid of them.
The other thing is it's interesting to compare this to it makes me think of Dirty Harry, because if you haven't seen anybody who hasn't seen Dirty Harry, the villain in that is a pretty direct reference to the Zodiac killer, and so it's this kind of wish fulfillment of like as if the rules, like the guardrails keeping cops from abusing people's rights or is what's keeping them from stopping the Zodiac killer. But it's this idea, if you just had a cop that could take, the law into his own hands, he could fix everything. This feels almost like a counterpoint to that response, which is a kind of reaction to the ineptitude. Like when we go through the history, it was John Wayne Gacy who was guilty of 33. It took him, and those were the ones they could pin on him. 33 he killed 33 people before he got stopped. And so this kind of feels like the other side of that response, of that feeling of these people are supposed to defend us and they can't stop these people from murdering upwards of 33 people or more.
Yeah, and that's actually like very true. Yeah. Very true. And I think if you're living in that time where those things are so common, the natural response is to look at things like current events and go, well, I mean, if this person could get away with 33 murders, there's no reason why Pamela Voorhees couldn't get away with 6 or 7 of them. So, there's something amiss here.
The heightened aspect is the timeline, is how quickly she's able to knock those out. Which, honestly, props to Mrs. Voorhees, because I just started going back to the gym this week and my legs have been cooked for days after leg day. So I don't know what Pamela's routine is, but man, she's doing all right. So after this, Ralph shows up in the pantry. Who knows what Ralph was doing in the pantry, how long he was there. What is it, Alice?
What he was touching in there. I don't
exactly.
know.
You might want to get a black light in there just to make sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does it like we talked about earlier. He's doing his warnings and then he goes off on his little silly bike. After that, Storm starts rolling in. Kevin Bacon and I think it's Marcy. They start going. They go to a cabin to get physical. Things are not going to go well for them. Bad choice at a slasher movie. Meanwhile, I think it's Brenda is the character's name. She floats the idea of strip monopoly, which seems insane. I like how she's like, instead of money, you do clothes. I'm like, have you played Monopoly? Like, and then when you see them playing, they still have money. I'm confused about the strip monopoly rules.
Never played it, couldn't tell you.
They don't have like a deck of cards to play strip poker. Monopoly?
Right? Yeah, right? Like, how does that work?
I guess maybe it's close. Like, that's an easy way to speed run Monopoly, because you're definitely going to run out of clothes quicker than the game finishes.
Yeah, right? Seriously.
So back to Kevin Bacon and Marcy. Ned is dead in the bunk. There's a scene where he sees them going off and he looks like he's jealous. And that's the last time we see him until he's dead. And I was like, yeah, good. Get Ned out of here. Get him out of here. And Marcy goes, they have sex. Marcy goes to the bathroom. And I was actually there's a reason Savini's a legend, man, because this is our first like real slasher kill in the movie. I guess the knife to the neck. Annie's knife to the neck. But I might be mixing up Annie and Alice's names. Sorry, gang. No, yeah, it was Annie. Gets the knife to the neck. But Kevin Bacon gets an arrow through the neck from under the bunk.
neck.
Yeah, it's gnarly. It's one of those two. I don't know if this happens with you sometimes, where you're watching an effect in the 80s and you're like, I don't know how you did this. I don't know where his head is in comparison to your prosthetic neck that you're doing. Like,
right.
That looked really good.
Yeah, and especially with like something like that where he's laying on the bed, like the thing that I would think is that he's actually like there's a cutout
Yeah.
in the bed for his head.
Yeah.
And then it's all like a prosthetic piece attached, and then they put the hose through, and that's how they're able to get the arrow through.
Yeah, but then that requires them to be doing like this number. It's cool. It's a really cool
Yeah.
gag. And then I will. There's a little bit of note on who gets arrowed and who doesn't, based on like foreshadowing in the movie that I feel like you could have dialed in a bit better. But yeah, Kevin Bacon gets it. Marcy goes to the bathroom. And Marcy starts quoting Catherine O'Hara in the bathroom, which like, oh, whatever, man. And then Marcy gets an axe to the face, which she just, by the way, she just kind of takes. Like, she's like, oh no.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean,
You're done. Thanks, Marcy. Thanks for playing.
Yeah. There goes Marcy. I think it was like a NECA toy with Mrs. Voorhees and the axe, and I'm like, oh, I kind of want it. I kind of want it. I love that we've done that with horror. That like again, like we talked about with Halloween. Like I have a Loomis action figure. That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, I know. And it was funny. Like I always never forget when Rob Zombie was like, I thought it was a problem when we got to a point where Michael Myers could be a plush doll, and he would push him and he'd play the Halloween theme. And I'm like, no,
Yeah,
it's great.
that's awesome.
Stop it.
Yeah, don't ruin this for
Shut
me.
up.
Yeah, so now we're down. We're down to Ned. We're down. These are the three in the car, by the way. We're down to Kevin Bacon, and we're down to Marcy. I have my note here. We see some of the cabins have names on them. One of them is Comanche. Another one is Seneca, and it's like, what's the naming convention here with the with the cabin names?
Right.
For some reason, the movie feels the need to check back in with owner Steve, and owner Steve is at a diner being real weird with like the lady behind the counter. He's not flirting with her because she's like older, but he's like, those counselors, keep in mind he's talking to like a 50-year-old woman. He's like, they're real babes in the woods, if you know what I mean, in every manner of the word. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you?
Yeah, well, and it's funny too because I'm rewatching the movie and I'm like, are you trying to imply that Steve could be the killer? Because he is older, he is creepy. Is that like the kind of the element? And I think for me it's a little bit hard because I've seen this movie so many times. I was trying to think of myself as like the person who watched it for the first time.
Yeah.
To see like, okay, who am I tracking as the potential killer? And I don't even know if back then I would have tracked that like Steve could have been the guy.
Well, because it doesn't make sense. He's like across town, or, he's on the other side of the county, basically.
Right. And like, would that work? Even if you're a first time viewer, would you watch that and go like, could it be him? But he is at the diner. He's gone, but he's that. It's like a nice way of trying to maybe hint towards that because he's not in a lot of the movie, yada, yada, yada. But I think ultimately, like, I don't think it really works.
I think my one note, having finished the movie, and part of this is what I thought the movie was going in, is, and we'll get into this once we get to the reveal, even though we've already said who it is. Yeah. I think my one real note, I think I actually really like this movie. I like the movie. But I think where it really fumbles is there is like literally zero setup for who the killer is. Like nothing is mentioned, and it's like that's a mistake. Like that's because it doesn't mean anything once they show up. Because it's like I didn't know to suspect this person even existed. Like I don't, and I think that's because what I like about the movie. And what I like about a lot of these earlier slashers we're watching is how elemental they are. It's the premise is so simple. A bunch of counselors at a camp that is presumed to be cursed are getting ready for the kids to show up, and they're killed one by one. That's it. There's no cults. There's no, zombie Jason that can possess other people. There's none of that shit. And again, going back to Halloween, just there's that real elemental core, and I really like that. And I think if they just had done like Mrs. Voorhees is around, but you don't know to suspect her because she's an older woman or whatever, but literally she comes out of nowhere, does an exposition dump. By the way, here's my motivation that wasn't even mentioned earlier. And here we go. And it's like, that's kind of lame, I think. Yeah, so Steve ends up hitchhiking because it's raining so hard. He ends up hitchhiking back with a cop to get back to the camp, and we find out that it's also a full moon, because I was talking about how their crime rates go up on a full moon.
Yeah.
My wife is a nurse, and she talks about how full moons are weird in the hospital.
Really?
Yeah. So it's a legit thing, and who knows why? Like, is it correlation isn't causation or whatever? That sort of a thing. But who knows? So he doesn't. By the way, he doesn't. Long story short, Steve don't make it back to camp. he's like within eye shot of the camp, and then he gets got.
Yeah.
Brenda they end up quitting their game of strip poker. Brenda goes back to a cabin to change, and she hears what sounds like a little kid crying, so she goes out to investigate. And this ends up with her right by. She was the girl that was standing by the archery target when Ned shot an arrow in it. The last time we see her is right by that. That doesn't mean anything. She doesn't killed by an arrow. She's not, there is a character that gets pincushioned later. It's not her. She's just dead. It's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, which I was like, oh man, why would you not show that?
Yeah.
Why imply it?
Yeah.
Just show it. You set it up. Just do it.
Yeah. So I guess my general note for Friday the 13th is a general failure of foreshadowing. Like, let me explain to you basic foreshadowing. So if you have a girl that stands by a target and it's hit by an arrow, and you do that, and then you see her by the target later when a killer's running around, have her killed with an arrow. That's what you're setting up, is what's happening. So Alice and Bill find the axe that took out Marcy. And so they go to call for help, but there's this really cool little tracking shot where you see through the cabin window, they're going to go call, and it pans up to the phone line, and we see where the phone line is cut. I thought it was a pretty cool little shot. Yeah, this is where Steve is killed. The camp is running off of a generator. The generator goes out. Bill goes to investigate it. Bye, Bill. Eventually, Alice goes looking for him, and she finds him. This is insane, Adam. He is pin-cushioned. It's dope. It's a cool kill, but it is one of those, when you find out who the killer is, you're like, time out.
Are you sure you didn't call Michael Myers to come over to Camp Crystal Lake real quick?
Yeah, because he is like pin-cushioned to the door, like feet off the ground, held up by multiple arrows.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. And, I haven't really thought about it, but now that we're talking about it, I'm like, what could she have done?
Yeah.
Did she really take the time to try to hoist him over the door and then shoot some arrows at him to really pin him to the door? How did that whole thing work out?
Yeah, exactly. Or
whatever.
This is because again, so this is also a point where she, I think maybe we're not quite there yet, but there's a points where she's chasing, I think it's when she's chasing Alice. She's chasing Alice. Alice ducks out. Then a car pulls up that has her in it. And I'm like, is she teleporting across? That's where I'm like, Jason has to be running around. And I don't know if him and Mrs. Voorhees are communicating, but this is not a one-woman job. This is not.
Yeah.
So Alice goes back to the main cabin. This is hilarious. So she does a really actually kind of neat little rope maneuver to she ties the door and throws the rope over the thing so that it won't open. And then she proceeds to move every stick of furniture in front of the door. Yeah. But the door opens out. So you already did the thing that would stop the door from opening. You did the rope thing. So save the furniture. There's other doors in that building. So save it for those.
God, you love the 80s.
Yeah, love the 80s, love these 80s slashers. So here's where we get it. So Alice throws every piece of furniture in front of the door. Then Brenda's body is thrown through a window. Then instantaneously, Brenda's thrown through a window. Alice freaks out. I think what she then does is she moves all the furniture away from the door, which is she threw the body from the outside. Don't go outside. But she goes outside, and then
I want to go where the killer is.
Yeah, and then she sees a Jeep pull up, and I'm like, how did Miss Voorhees go from throwing the body through the window to getting in the Jeep? Mm-hmm. Legit question. How did she do it?
Continuity, baby.
Yeah. So,
and also, what are you trying? What is the point, and what are you trying to do by going to get your Jeep? Are you trying to play it off "Oh, I'm Mrs. Voorhees. I hear there's things happening. Do you sound like you need help?" In reality, I would just be like, "Hey, yo, it's me, bitch. I'm coming for you."
Dude, yeah, she is barely capable of keeping up the charade. She comes in and is slightly like, "Oh, I used to work here, whatever," and like almost immediately she's like, there was a little boy. Have you heard of Jason? There's a little boy here, and he died drowning because of counselors. Oh, guess what? He's my son. Oh, guess, bitch, I'm gonna stand you. It's like, all right. And yeah, so this is where I get into my main thing. I think this movie would be more effective if somebody had mentioned Jason's death earlier, and if the guy that gave Annie a ride mentioned it. Sorry if I missed it, gang. I don't remember him mentioning a kid drowning, but maybe he did.
I mean, they do. At some point at the beginning of the movie, it is mentioned. It's brought up that like counselors were killed and a kid drowned in 57.
Okay, so you got the kid drowning, but here's what I thought, since I hadn't seen this before, but I knew the reveal. I assumed what it was there was a legend around Jason. This kid drowned, and now he comes back to kill people. But the reveal is it's not actually Jason; it's his mom. And to me, that's a more effective way to tell this story. That's that you introduce the mom earlier, but you don't say it's Jason's mom. You introduce the idea that Jason drowned and that maybe there's an urban legend that he comes back and kills people.
Right.
And then you find out that the way Jason comes back is through his mom. Because we get kind of a reverse Psycho situation where she starts speaking in Jason's voice. This actress is really good, by the way. I thought she was really effective at this. And I think they did good casting because she toes the line really well, that she can come across as like a older middle-aged woman, but there's a stockiness to her that it's like, I don't know, maybe she's lifting people off their feet and jamming them to doors. Maybe she is. I don't know.
DJ, what do you think she's been doing for the last 20 years at that camp? She been lifting, brother.
I love
the
idea.
Rocky IV training sequence is Pamela Voorhees.
I love the idea of like, she comes in with a rain slicker, and if she takes it off, you realize she has like a sleeper build and she's fucking yoked. Like,
she actually looks like Matilda's principal.
Yeah.
Or teacher.
Like, she's like jacked as shit, and she puts a bowling ball at Alice's head or something.
Exactly.
Oh my god. So she starts ranting about Jason. This is where we get our classic killer end of the movie killer chase.
Yeah.
Between our final girl and the killer. I have my notes. Weirdly, Jason looks like a little monster in the flashback. I wonder what the decision making was there. That I guess maybe once they decided what they wanted the ending to be, they're like, okay, Jason already kind of needs to look like a monster before he dies. He can't just be a normal kid. He's already got to be a little creepy. And then I also love that there's a Voorhees family tradition, Adam, that we have to string up our bodies into little booby traps.
Yeah. Yeah.
little like, oh, surprise. By the way, here's the body over here. This is again pulled directly from Halloween and what Carpenter did there. Fortunately, now we get into a little bit of good news, bad news. Because the good news for Alice is apparently there's guns with live ammunition on the property that kids are going to be showing up at. What? It is the 80s, but what?
Right.
Bad news is they're not completely insane, I guess, because it looks like the ammunition is like locked away, that she can't get to it, which is a bummer in this situation, but I think is generally good since you're going to be having kids.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Alice gets into a fist fight with Mrs. Voorhees. They chase each other around until eventually, like, Mrs. Voorhees comes at Alice with the machete. Alice gets the machete and straight up yoinks Mrs. Voorhees' head right off her shoulders, which is dope. That's cool.
It is a good ending. Like, I think that's the one thing that I'll definitely give the movie is that it does something so incredibly extreme.
Yes.
Because then the big question, like, as soon as that happens, you go, oh, okay, so this is a one and done.
Yeah. We did it.
There can't be. There's no more story. That's it.
We didn't, dude. You and I have not done a sequel yet. That's going to change very quickly. But we have not.
God.
Yeah,
so
but
fast.
we're
so fast.
But right now, like they don't know yet. They don't know that this is going to be. We're going to make 1 billion of these movies. So we're
gonna go to space, bitch.
Yeah, so they straight up chop off Mrs. Voorhees' head, and then Alice kind of just like rows out into a canoe. Which, I mean, I guess we established earlier that it's like 10 miles away from the main road.
Right.
So I guess, like, listen, I need to sleep. I'm tired. So I'm going to go in the middle of the lake, take a quick nap. And then once it's daylight, I'm going to figure it out. I've talked myself into it. I was very confused about this choice. And now I've talked myself into thinking it's a good, never mind. You know what? That makes sense.
Safest place to be is in the water.
Yeah. I just need to shut my eyes for a minute. So you're going to need to come and row out and get me if that's your goal. And then cops show up in the morning, and then we get into the penultimate scene, which I actually think should be the ending of the movie, which is she sees the police, Al sees the police, she waves to them, and then Jason's rotting corpse erupts from the water and grabs her. And which, of course, this scene is iconic. It's probably one of the most iconic scenes in this movie.
Yeah.
It's probably the reason why when you do the sequel, you make Jason the bad guy. But we get a scene after it where like it's one of those like it's all a dream and you were there or whatever. But she's like, wait, was the boy still out there? And the white boy, and she's like, he's still out there. And like, no, you just end with Jason going out of the water and yoinking her. You don't need this whole hospital scene.
No, and also like it truly like doesn't really make sense if you think about it, because why would her vision of Jason Voorhees be this disfigured child?
Yeah.
You know, like that detailed, and then they roll with that and make that the thing in the next film. You know, I think it's totally fine, you know, saying that like, well, the counselors, they let him drown in the lake. And then you have that kind of like nightmare of like a kid attacking you.
Yeah.
You know, so like I get why they wanted to make it kind of scary. But yeah, I feel like that could have just been the ending. And then you go into 2 and you're like, oh my God, son of a bitch is still alive.
Yeah. And that's why I think like if you did a better job foreshadowing that like the core mythology around the camp is a kid drowned. This kid named Jason drowned. By the way, did you hear about the kid named Jason drowned? And so you establish that. So even though Miss Voorhees is the killer, this ending, which I think on a visceral level, maybe not on a plot or writing level, I don't know that it works, but on a visceral level, it's really effective. It becomes more like you've almost been building toward it that entire time, that this girl this whole time has been hearing about the kid that drowned. So whether it's a nightmare or whether it's real, it's informed by that story. But considering we just heard about Jason like maybe 20 minutes ago, it kind of feels like out of nowhere, and then immediately backtracking and be like, it was a dream. It's like, that's not, let us figure out in the sequel whether it's a dream or not. You just end on that. And I think this is something we learn because a lot of slasher movies will pull from this ending, or specifically the Nightmare on Elm Street movies will love a good, like, actually Freddy's back. And they just end on that note. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. You end with her getting grabbed by Jason. That's your ending. Don't do the hospital.
Yeah, no.
Anyway, or Mrs. Voorhees' headless corpse, if you really want to get like,
Yeah, that actually would have been fun too, because it's still scary and does all that stuff. But yeah, it's great.
So that is Friday the 13th, the original Friday the 13th from 1980. Adam, what do you think about the original Friday the 13th?
I mean, it's still to this day a really fun watch, and I think especially when I get to introduce people to it, because there are surprisingly, well, I guess not surprisingly, because, you know, horror is such a, it's easier to know the big reveals of something like Star Wars than it is Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Because Star Wars is accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th, you got to love horror. You got to be into that sort of thing. But it is fun in the few times that I've had the opportunity to show this movie to people, and they don't know. They keep waiting for the guy in the hockey mask to show up, and it's not him. So I always enjoy that element of surprise when it's Pamela and they go, wait a minute, is that really the killer? Like, are they playing with me? And I'm like, no, that's who it is in the first movie. So I enjoy that element of it. I still really like it. You know, like, I think Halloween, in terms of like in the sense of like these slasher movies that came out in the 70s and 80s, Halloween to me still is better.
Yeah.
Just in execution and everything.
Well, it's a John Carpenter movie, so
yeah,
so
it's a John Carpenter movie. Like it's already going to be better. But I still have such a fun time with this film. And I like the fact that, you know, this one starts to set up more lore. Mm-hmm. Halloween isn't really worried about that. Halloween's not trying to define who Michael Myers is. But this one's not necessarily trying to define who Jason is, but because of how it explains the origins of how we get to Jason Voorhees, you know, there is a lot more lore inherently built into this franchise. So that's also a fun little addition or new element that we don't really see in Halloween and some of the other films that we've seen before this.
Well, I also think what's interesting is that we're also, to me, it kind of feels like, as we started talking about it, I realized it kind of feels like every movie we've watched has built to this one, and this is where, because you can see elements of Psycho in this movie with Pamela Voorhees. You can see elements of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with how the kids are kind of shitty. Obviously, heavily influenced by Halloween, opening with the POV shot, all that stuff. And it's kind of like, okay, so here we've now taken these separate movies that were all kind of talking to each other in some way, to now it's coalescing into a genre. This is where it's finally taking form into, this is a genre of movie that we're going to keep making because you can make them cheap and they will make you money. And so now this is a type of movie that we're going to starting here. Like you said, they're all kind of one and done. And Friday the 13th, both in 1981, literally the next year, we'll get a Friday the 13th 2 and a Halloween 2. So we are now at the point where, like, no, this is...
Here we go, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're taking the leash off. We're making more of these movies. And you can kind of feel that coalesce here.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And, as we're talking about it, I'm thinking to myself, like, you could really look and pinpoint and look at the other movies that we've watched. And I almost want to say that Texas Chainsaw, Black Christmas, and Halloween are kind of like the epilogue to the slasher genre.
Yeah.
And it really takes those three movies before we get to Friday the 13th. And Friday the 13th almost does feel like you could call it the first real entry in the slasher genre.
Yeah.
Because like you just pointed out, it takes all those elements and kind of remixes it into one film and still adds something new and different to the mix. And yeah, and I feel like once we get to this movie, 1980 all the way through the 1980s into the 90s as well, but especially those 80s.
Yeah.
The 80s really like took what Halloween and Friday the 13th did and went, we gotta just capitalize on this
100%, to the degree that, like, we've basically been doing a movie, we had 1960, then 1974, 1978, 1980. Like, as I look at the list we've started to compile, it's like we've got 3 more entries in 1980. Then there's like 4 in 1981. We might require a little bit of a format change. A bunch of entries in 1982. You know what I mean? Like, it really ramps up moving on from here. But let us know in the comments if you've seen Friday the 13th, what you think about it. If you hadn't seen it before, were you surprised about the Pamela Voorhees reveal? Let us know if there's other obviously there's the classic ones, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. Those ones we're going to be covering. But if there's something that's not on our list that or that you think might fly under the radar, let us know in the comments. And please, as always, share with your friends. Like Adam and I typically do superhero stuff. Our superhero stuff tends to do a little bit better, but I love the show, would love to keep doing it. So please share it with your friends. If you know other horror fans, share it with them. Or if you're new to horror, check it out. It's weird to say check it out at the end of the episode, but check it out, man. And thank you all, everybody that supports us on Patreon. We appreciate you, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.